make sure he's cleared out all of his session, everything.
That's fine.
Everything's closed
So we just need to make sure that
So the YouTube link's live, but we haven't started the webinar yet. Should I begin that now? We're at that time.
that's Olga's call. Let me check one
Yes.
thing.
All right,
Oh,
I'll start.
Tom, go ahead. And everyone, please mute yourselves moving forward. Thank you.
All right, beginning now. Good luck, everybody. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please note that we are going to be beginning our scoping meeting in just a few minutes, just after the 2 o'clock hour. So please stay tuned and look forward to having you participate today. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. You're tuning in to the remote public scoping meeting for the 250 Water Street proposal, seeker number 21 DCP 084M. My name is Olga Abnader, and I am the Director of the New York City Department of City Planning, Environmental Assessment and Review Division, or EARD. Stephanie Chaloux, Deputy Director of EARD, will be co-hosting today's meeting with me. And in the event of any technical difficulties on my end, Stephanie will take over this meeting on my behalf. We truly appreciate everyone's patience as we adjust to this remote scoping meeting format. I do want to take a moment to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to attend this remote meeting. I want to acknowledge that technology like Zoom, which we are using today, is imperfect. However, it is an invaluable tool that keeps us all safe during this public health crisis. I would also like to emphasize that all comments that are heard today verbally during today's scoping meeting, will also be considered in the same way as our written comments and testimony. We will welcome all comments and written testimony through Monday, January 11th, 2021, and we provide written comments the same attention and consideration as all comments received live at today's meeting. I'd like to now move on to the next slide. We will now proceed to the formal public scoping meeting for the 250 Water Street proposal. For the record, the seeker application number for this proposal is 21 DCP 084M. Today's date is December 17, 2020, and the time is approximately 2 p.m. Next slide, please. Again, I'm Olga Abnader, and I'm the Director of the Environmental Assessment and Review Division at the New York City Department of City Planning. I'll be chairing today's scoping meeting. The Department of City Planning is acting on behalf of the City Planning Commission as the lead agency for this proposal's environmental review. As lead agency, the department oversees the preparation and completion of the Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, for the 250 Water Street proposal. Next slide. Joining me are several of my colleagues from the Department of City Planning. As I mentioned previously, Stephanie Chaloux, Deputy Director of EARD, joins us today. Edith Suchen and Eric Botsford, the Director and Deputy Director of the Department's Manhattan office, join us as well. Diane McCarthy, Senior Team Leader in EARD, joins us today. Allison Brown, Senior Urban Planner in the Manhattan office, and Stephen Johnson, Team Leader for Community District 1 in the Manhattan office, are also part of today's meeting. Next slide. Together, we are here to receive your comments on the draft scope of work for the Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or DEIS, for the 250 Water Street proposal. The draft scope of work identifies all of the subjects that will be analyzed in the upcoming DEIS and explains how those subjects will be studied. The draft scope of work is available on the Department of City Planning's website, Environmental Review page, Scoping Meetings page. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's meeting is to allow for public participation in the preparation of the draft environmental impact statement at the earliest stage possible. Toward that end, the Department of City Planning will have an opportunity today to receive comments on the draft scope of work from elected officials, government agencies, community board representatives, and members of the general public. We will also welcome written comments on the draft scope of work. Those written comments can be submitted to us through Monday, January 11, 2021. Next slide, please. At the end of the written comment period, the department as lead agency will review all comments, including those we hear today, as well as written comments that we receive throughout the public comment period. After carefully reviewing all comments, the department will decide what changes, if any, need to be made to the draft scope of work, and the department will issue a final scope of work. It is a final scope of work that will serve as a basis for preparing the draft environmental impact statement. Next slide. Today's scoping meeting marks the beginning of the environmental review process for this proposal, and no decisions will be made today regarding the proposal's draft scope of work. The purpose of today's meeting is to allow the public to provide comments on the draft scope of work and to allow the department to listen to those comments. It is important to us that all voices be heard today. Next slide. I will now focus on the structure and format of today's public scoping meeting, which will be divided into 3 parts. During part 1 of today's meeting, the applicant team will provide a brief overview describing the proposal. Keith O'Connor of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill will discuss the project and its components. Next, Charlie Fields at AKRF Inc., the environmental consultant for this proposal, will provide a short summary of the draft scope of work. During the second part of today's meeting, we will receive comments and testimony from elected officials, government agencies, and community board representatives. During the third and final part of today's meeting, the department will receive comments from the general public. Today's meeting will end only when everyone who has signed up to provide testimony has had a chance to be heard. Next slide, please. Onto a few logistics. Once again, the protocol for today is intended to ensure that everyone has a chance to speak. If you do wish to speak and provide testimony today and plan to access this meeting online using a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone, please remember to register online to the City Planning Scoping Meeting for 250 Water Street page of the NYC Engage portal at nyc.gov/engage. A link to join our meeting and provide your testimony will be emailed to you after you have completed the registration process on the NYC Engage portal. At that point, we will add you to our speakers list. Next slide. When it is your turn to speak, your name will be called and you will be granted temporary speaking privileges by Department of City Planning staff. Please listen closely for your name to be called. Once your name has been called, we will help unmute your microphone and you will be asked to convey your remarks. Very importantly, to allow us to hear from everyone who wishes to speak, we ask that everyone please limit their remarks to 3 minutes unless otherwise notified. A 3-minute countdown clock will run on the screen if you are participating online. At that 3-minute mark, your time will expire and you will be asked to conclude your remarks. Please also note that your testimony today will be verbal only. We will be able to hear you, but we will not be able to see you. Next slide. Just an additional note of instruction for those of you joining us by telephone today. If you wish to provide testimony via telephone, you must press *9 upon my prompt. Please listen for me to call out the last 3 digits of your phone number, and at that point, you will be given temporary ability to share your testimony. You must press *6 to unmute your telephone, and we will be able to hear you speak. When your testimony is complete or your 3 minutes have expired, whichever comes first, you must press *6 again to mute yourself. We would like to encourage any dial-in participants who wish to provide testimony to please register via telephone using the dial-in participant hotline. Please note also that muting and unmuting our registered speakers may take a moment as we continue to adjust to this Zoom remote meeting format. Next slide. Once again, a note on time limits. Speakers from the general public have 3 minutes to provide testimony, but there are a few exceptions to the 3-minute time limit. Elected officials, members of government agencies, and representatives of community boards have the courtesy of jumping to the front of the queue and are not limited to 3 minutes. I'll also note that live stream viewers, those of you viewing us on live stream and also wishing to provide testimony, please be mindful of potential background noise during your testimony. Make sure that any live streaming devices are fully muted when you begin your testimony so that we can hear you and in order to avoid an echo. Next slide, please. I will note that once again, we will accept comments through Monday, January 11th, 2021, and we will accept your comments via mail. And our address is 120 Broadway, 31st floor, New York, New York, 10271. Attention, Olga Abinator, or via email 21dcp0 84m_dl@planning.nyc.gov is our email address. Next slide. If anyone has missed our detailed instructions at the outset of the meeting, please remember to visit NYC Engage portal at www.nyc.gov/engage for instructions on how you may participate. And we will repeat the instructions for those of you tuning in via telephone. We will now move on to the first part of today's meeting. At this time, the applicant for the 250 Water Street proposal will present an overview of the proposed project. That presentation will be followed by the environmental consultant team, who will summarize the draft scope of work.
Okay, if you can hear me, I'm going to jump in. My name is Keith O'Connor. I'm the Director of Urban Design and Planning at SOM, and I'll be introducing the project today. Next. The proposed project is located at 250 Water Street in Lower Manhattan. It's just south of the Brooklyn Bridge and within the South Street Seaport Historic District, which you can see here outlined in orange. The boundary of the study area is also outlined here in red. As you'll hear in a few moments, there are several zoning actions related to the redevelopment of 250 Water Street into an approximately 913,000 gross square foot mixed use project with commercial office uses in a low contextual base, ground floor retail and community space fronting the surrounding streets, and then residential uses in 2 towers, including CB1's first affordable housing that would be subject to the city's MIH standards. 250 Water Street site is currently a large surface parking lot on the edge of the historic district. It's located between Pearl Street and Water Street and between Peck Slip and Beekman Street. In addition, the EIS is going to study a related project, namely the renovation, restoration, and reopening of the South Street Seaport Museum, as well as its potential expansion to the John Street lot, which is a small vacant lot located at the corner of South Street and Burling Slip. Next. In order to facilitate the mixed-use project at 250 Water, the applicant proposes to distribute unused development rights from the waterfront to the project site at 250 Water Street. Specifically, the proposal is to allow approximately 415,000 zoning square feet of unused city-owned development rights on the waterfront, as well as approximately 30,000 zoning square feet that are currently held in the South Street Seaport Development Rights Bank. And all of those rights would be distributed to and used on the 250 Water Street site, which is closer to transit, closer to tall buildings of Lower Manhattan, and further from the waterfront. And the result of this would be approximately 913,000 gross square foot mixed use development, again, with this low contextual podium and 2 towers as set back from the base, which you see here in the image labeled 250 Water. Next. As mentioned, the site is 48,000 plus square feet. It's a full block site. It is currently the largest vacant site in any historic district in New York City. It's currently occupied by a surface parking lot, as it has been for the last 50 plus years. Next. And the proposal would replace that surface parking lot with this proposed vibrant mixed-use building. Above the base, as you can see here, 2 470-foot tall towers that would be set back 40 feet from Beekman Street, 40 feet from Peck Slip, 20 feet from Water Street, and 10 feet from Pearl Street. Next. You see a couple views here. This is a view from the Brooklyn Bridge Promenade. It's showing the low scale and predominantly brick and masonry South Street Seaport Historic District. You see that in the foreground. You see the contextual base of the project here in the middle ground, and then you see the 2 towers set back from and rising above that podium, again here shown in the context of Pearl Street, Water Street, and the towers of Lower Manhattan that you see beyond. Next. This is another view of the project. You're sort of sitting above the East River. You can see that the proposed project, by transferring those development rights, moving them off the waterfront, it preserves the low scale of the waterfront, and it distributes those unused development rights from Pier 17 and the Tin Building, which is shown here in the center of the image, to the Upland 250 Water Street site, which is just to the right and center of this image here. Next slide. Couple of eye level views. So this is an eye level view. You're standing now at the corner of South Street and Beekman Street. You're looking west. In the foreground, you can see the low scale historic buildings in the heart of the district lining the cobblestone streets here on Beekman Street. In the background, in the middle, you see 8 Spruce Street. It's also known as the Gary Tower. And then in the middle ground, you're catching a glimpse of the brick podium of 250 Water Street. And then at the top of the image here, you're beginning to see the towers rising above that low base. Next slide. It's another image here standing on Pearl Street, looking south. Peck Slip School is immediately to the left of this image. Southbridge Towers is on the right side of the image. And then in the middle, again, you're seeing this low base of 250 Water, see the towers rising above. And then in the background, you're seeing the context of towers along the Water Street corridor in the background. Next slide. And then finally, here's a view standing on Water Street now, looking to the south. The proposed 250 Water Street project is to the right side. Ground floor retail, community space, residential lobby entrances, again, fronting the cobblestone streets of the historic district. And then as you see again in the background, the towers of Lower Manhattan visible beyond. Next. And then switching just for a moment to the museum, the EIS, as you will hear, will analyze the potential impacts of the renovation, the restoration, and the reopening of the South Street Seaport Museum, as well as its potential expansion to the John Street lot. As many of you may know, the museum was founded back in 1967. 53-year-old Seaport Museum has always had its home here in historic Schermerhorn Row, but since its founding has also had responsibilities for preserving and interpreting the broader district, even before that district was formally designated as a historic district in 1977. Next. And the work that's proposed here really would help to facilitate the consolidation of the museum, include shifting their entrance from the mid-block to a more prominent location here at the corner of South Street and Fulton Street. And it would position the museum to achieve their long-held aspiration to build a new building as a model of resilient and sustainable design on the John Street lot, which is shown here in the middle, sort of background of the image. It's a copper-clad, heavy timber building in scale with the historic buildings of Schermerhorn Row. And with that quick overview, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie Fields at AKRF, who's going to discuss the proposed action and the scope of work for the environmental impact statement.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlie Fields, and I'm with AKRF, the environmental consultants for the project. As noted by Olga, the draft scope of work has been issued, and today we're here to listen to your comments on the draft scope. So now I'm going to provide a brief overview of the proposed actions, the analysis framework, and the technical areas in the draft scope. The left part of this slide shows the project area. This includes the site at 250 Water Street that's proposed for development. Also shown is the site of the South Street Seaport Museum, including the site of the potential expansion. The red outline includes those sites, as well as the areas for reallocation of floor area and potential streetscape and open space improvements. The right side of the slide shows the proposed actions, which include special permits, allowing for bulk modifications on the development site, allowing for the distribution and transfer of development rights to the development site, requiring potential streetscape, site plan, and district improvements in the project area, and facilitating a development with affordable units under MIH parameters. Also included are zoning text amendments to the special permit and special purpose district texts and a curb cut authorization for Pearl Street. There are also disposition actions authorizing the sale of development rights and funding decisions if needed to effectuate other changes to the affected area. So let's talk a little bit about the analysis framework. Next slide, please. In the no action condition, the development site is anticipated to be redeveloped with a new as-of-right building. Development under the no action condition would be a mixed-use building containing mostly residential uses with ground floor retail and community facility uses, as well as below-grade parking spaces. Next slide. The applicant proposes the construction of a mixed-use building at 250 Water Street that would contain market rate and affordable housing, retail, office, and community facility spaces, as well as parking. I'll talk about the program spaces a little bit later. The proposed plan includes 2 towers set on a base with commercial uses in the base and residential above. There would also be ground floor retail and some community facility space. Next slide, please. This table shows the no action and with action development programs that will be looked at in the EIS, as well as the incremental difference between the two that will form the basis for the environmental analyses. As Keith noted, the proposed project would also facilitate the restoration, reopening, and potential expansion of the South Street Seaport Museum. While the future of the museum remains uncertain, for the purposes of analysis, it is conservatively assumed that absent the proposed project, the South Street Seaport Museum would not be operating. As such, the EIS analyses will consider the full increment of the museum's operations. Next slide, please. As shown in this slide, we expect that most or all of the technical areas from the Seeker Technical Manual will need to be examined in the EIS. For each of the environmental areas, the draft EIS will consider future conditions without and with the proposed actions in the analysis year. The DEIS will also account for other approved or planned development projects that are likely to be completed by the build year. We'll also look at mitigation where significant adverse impacts are identified and consider alternatives to the project. So what I'm going to present now is a short overview of some of the key areas for analysis. Next slide, please. The land use analysis will identify existing uses and development trends in a quarter-mile study area, discuss the land use and zoning changes that would take place as a result of the proposed actions, and evaluate consistency and compatibility with land use, zoning, and public policy. An important part of this work will be identifying other background projects to include in the EIS analyses. And since we're in the coastal zone, we'll also look at consistency with the WRP and prepare the coastal assessment form. The draft EIS will examine potential impacts on open space in a half-mile study area and account for the worker population in a smaller quarter-mile study area. Based on the number of people that would be added to the open space user population, this analysis will quantitatively and qualitatively assess how the proposed actions would affect open space conditions. Since the proposed actions would result in tall new structures, the draft EIS will include a shadows analysis to determine potential effects on open spaces or other sun-sensitive resources, including the river. The area is a designated historic district, so the historic resources analysis will look at the proposed project's compatibility with the surrounding area. Archaeological resources will also be assessed for both the 250 Water Street site and the museum expansion site. Next slide, please. The urban design and visual resources analysis will account for changes in pedestrian level views from the surrounding area, as well as from public points of view farther away. So we'll need to prepare renderings and diagrams that will show what the proposed project would look like. For hazardous materials, 250 Water Street is a former manufacturing site and is enrolled in the Brownfields Cleanup Program. So we will summarize environmental reports and work performed to date. We'll also do a phase 1 environmental site assessment for the museum expansion site and identify any additional work required to avoid adverse impacts. In terms of water and sewer infrastructure, the draft EIS will focus on wastewater and stormwater conveyance and treatment. This analysis will calculate the sanitary and stormwater flows resulting from the proposed actions, and in coordination with DEP, determine the potential for impacts on sewer infrastructure and identify any improvements if required. Next slide, please. The transportation chapter will analyze the project's potential effects on local traffic, parking, and pedestrian conditions, as well as public transit services. The analysis framework will be developed with the agencies to determine study area intersections, area sidewalks, corners, and crosswalks, and transit elements for analysis. We will also look at vehicular and pedestrian safety, as well as parking conditions. The air quality analysis will consider both mobile and stationary sources. We will also consider the effects of proposed parking garage exhausts and the potential presence of major sources in the area. Noise will consider the potential for mobile sources to generate noise and will examine noise attenuation measures needed for the project buildings. Next slide, please. For the GHG chapter, we will quantify emissions and assess consistency with the city's GHG goals. And we will discuss measures to reduce energy consumption and GHG emissions. Design elements to address climate change will also be included. The draft EIS will also include an analysis of potential construction-related impacts. It will include a conceptual schedule and a description of construction activities. This chapter will assess environmental concerns related to construction, such as vehicular and pedestrian conditions, air quality, hazardous materials, natural resources, noise, historic resources, and other applicable areas. Measures to minimize or avoid potential construction impacts will also be identified. Finally, a number of other technical areas that will be covered in the DEIS will include socioeconomic conditions, natural resources, sanitation, energy, neighborhood character, and public health if necessary. Thank you very much for coming. We look forward to hearing your comments on the draft scope of work, and I'll now turn it back over to Olga Abinader.
Thank you. I'd like to now ask our production team to please revert to our our introduction slide. Thank you. I see that that's up now. We will now move on to part 2 of today's public scoping meeting. At this time, we will begin receiving testimony from any elected officials, community board representatives, and government agency representatives who wish to join us today. I will note that if any participants do experience any technical issues that prevent them from speaking and providing testimony, what we'll do is take a brief pause, call their name again, and if still there are technical difficulties, we will move on to the next speaker to allow for troubleshooting to happen in the background. And we will call your name at a later time. If this happens to you, please revisit the how-to guides page on the NYC Engage portal for assistance. Also, for assistance, anyone who's dialing in who needs help should hang up the phone and call 877-853-5247, 877-853-5247. You will be prompted for a meeting ID and a password, and the meeting ID is 935-2820-2156, 935-2820-2156, and the password is the number 1. All right, it does look like we do have one speaker in this category and in this part of our scoping meeting. Our first speaker is Community Board 1 Representative Tammy Meltzer. Representative Tammy Meltzer, if you are able to unmute yourself, you're ready for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Manhattan Community Board 1. We acknowledge that this process allows for the draft scope of work hearing to occur before the review of the landmark stage is completed. However, the results from the 250 Water Street Brownfield cleanup remedial investigation data is also unavailable at this time, has not been released, and is not anticipated to be released before the end of the public comment period. This puts the community at an inherent disadvantage to layer these pieces of the process so close together. The community is hyper-focused on preparing a recommendation for an unprecedented and highly controversial Landmarks Preservation Commission application, and has not had time to put resources to put due diligence into reviewing the draft scope of work in time for the December 17th hearing. The Landmarks Preservation Commission ruling, which will happen next month, could likely require modifications to the design of the proposal for 250 Water Street, and hence would affect the scope of its environmental review. As I mentioned, the public has yet to receive the results of the remedial investigation analysis on the Brownfield Cleanup Program application at 250 Water, which is also critical to the department's review. CB1 is really very busy and overwhelmed with the number of proposals that have come before us currently, specifically immensely impactful proposals that are now in ULURP for citywide zoning, coastal flood resiliency, the rezoning of Governor's Island, and other actions. We strongly believe that there has been inadequate public engagement on all of these proposals. Furthermore, given the unique character of this proposed project in the historic district, it may require analysis not yet included. We ask that DCP do a much better job of scheduling project reviews and hearings to allow the community adequate time for a fair and robust engagement, which is particularly critical on projects of this magnitude. We believe the January 11th deadline for comment be extended for at least 30 days to give the community a chance to review the 250 Water Street Brownfield Cleanup remedial investigation data and incorporate that information into the feedback on the scoping for the draft environmental impact statement. Thank you very much again for your time and this opportunity. I wish you all a happy holiday with loved ones. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We will now move and proceed to part 3 of today's public scoping meeting. At this time, members of the general public will be able to speak for up to 3 minutes. A 3-minute time tracker will begin when the members of the public begin their testimony. So I do see that our production team is already displaying our time tracker, which is great. Please remember that after your 3 minutes have passed, you will be asked to conclude your remarks and we will move on to the next speaker. I'll now call on speakers number 2 through 7, just so everyone is aware of who will be coming up to speak today. Speaker number 2 is Jonathan Boulware. Speaker number 3 is Brendan Sexton. Speaker number 4 is Laura Norwitz. Speaker number 5 is Maggie Flanagan. Speaker number 6 is Jonathan Kabeck. Speaker number 7 is Stephen Edict. Jonathan Boulware, speaker number 2, we are ready for your testimony. Please unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jonathan Boulware. I am a resident of downtown. I live in the South Street Seaport Historic District, where my wife and I are raising our son. I also serve as the president and CEO of South Street Seaport Museum, an institution that I have known and loved for nearly 30 years. I offer the following comments for your consideration. The Seeker Code indicates that cultural and economic needs are within the purview of scoping. The Seaport Museum has, for more than 50 years, been a leader in education, interpretation, and elevation of the maritime roots of New York City. Founded in the old port of New York, the museum delivers education and programming in ships, shops, and buildings of 19th century New York, a city that was a port before it was a city. We've been a leader in environmental education, professional mariner development, and maritime history for decades. If you've been to the South Street Seaport Museum, you know that the 19th century buildings are incredible. They are also challenging to use as museum space and costly to operate and maintain. And they are vulnerable to events like Sandy, a flooding event from which we have not yet recovered. A museum at the water's edge knocked out by a flooding event on the very shores that made the growth of the city possible. The Seaport Museum connects New Yorkers to our cultural and economic history with broad city nationwide narratives of shipping, trade, immigration, slavery, the bold and the shameful stories of how New York was made. Stories of the people who built a global metropolis and world financial capital from a seaside trading port. Despite myriad programmatic achievements for which the museum is known worldwide, the institution has struggled perennially, entirely because of a lack of reliable revenues, those that were originally intended to come from the real estate in the district. We've been kept alive by the hard work and devotion of staff, board, and volunteers, but if we're to successfully come out of this crisis, we'll need a plan. The proposal for 250 Water Street under consideration here today, subsequent to DCP's proper review, will create a stronger South Street Seaport Historic District, one without a surface parking lot that supports an outdated and fossil fuel-driven transportation model, one with a strong, vibrant, sustainable, and resilient South Street Seaport Museum. It will support a stronger New York City by introducing affordable and market rate housing in a community that has the infrastructure to support it. The new housing and museum together are emblematic of the city we seek to become, especially in the aftermath of a crippling pandemic. The greatest city in the world deserves a world-class maritime museum reflective of its port roots. I aim to make that so. We aim to make that so. I urge you to move forward in review with all possible speed and to consider the importance of this comprehensive project to the future of the seaport and of the city. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is speaker number 3, Brendan Sexton, followed by Laura Norwitz. Brendan Sexton, please unmute yourself.
Does that work?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the commission, to you, Olga, to staff for allowing the South Street Seaport Museum to speak clearly on this matter. We are, I think everybody who knows this area knows we like to think of ourselves as the beating heart, to use Jonathan's phrase, of the district. And we are keenly aware of the history, tradition, and cultural meaning of the district, and also keenly aware of our responsibility to interpret and expand and make plain for the public and make available for use by the public this history and cultural tradition, the wealth of maritime and early economic tradition that made New York the greatest port in the world for a very long time, and still, of course, the greatest city in the world. We have at the Bound Printing Shop an aspect of the maritime history of our town that is not usually appreciated. There was, in fact, for many years, the greatest client for local printers were the shipping companies. Everybody had to get the schedules, who was arriving, who wasn't. And then after that, of course, the trade, what was arriving and how much was it worth. And the financial press got its start here. Financial press became, of course, at one point it seemed to consume about half our neighborhood. The thriving, employment-rich financial printers were a major part of New York City for a long time and still exist, by the way. But they were closely linked to the maritime functions of the seaport. The cotton and textile trades that New York became famous for because the cotton came in here, the textiles came in here, the fabrics went out from there. We are at risk. Our museum and our district are on a knife's edge, a razor's edge. And this proposal provides, for the first time in a long time, and I'm, by the way, on my second tour of duty on the board of the South Street Seaport Museum. And in this whole time, this proposal is the first one that provides for a regular ongoing income stream and actual wealth creation for the Seaport Museum. Quite remarkable. So although affordable housing and things like this are legitimately a focus of much public attention, I have to make the plea that the museum is what we think of when we think of the South Street Seaport, and we are at risk, and this proposal can save us and therefore can save what we think of as the Seaport District.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Laura Norwitz. Laura Norwitz, please unmute yourself.
Hi,
You're on.
Okay, thank you. My name is Laura Norwitz. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Education at South Street Seaport Museum. I read the draft scope of work for the project for 250 Water Street, and I was struck by the significance of cultural resources to the scoping process, and the components such as urban design, visual resources, neighborhood character, and pedestrian experience are included in the impact statement. The greatest cultural impact of this project is the survival of South Street Seaport Museum. And the greatest cultural impact of failure of this project would be the likely demise of South Street Seaport Museum. The Seaport Museum has a critical and non-duplicated role to play in the city of New York. I wasn't born or raised in the city, and I'd lived in New York for about 15 years already before I happened to come to the Seaport Museum. And it was then, viewing an exhibition about New York and the Erie Canal, that I got it. What made New York, New York? Trade, shipping, the seaport. Suddenly, I got it. Through educational programs at the Seaport Museum, thousands of students per year of all demographics and from all parts of the city have the opportunity to make this connection. Our programs for school children and exhibitions and programs for the public encourage students and others to make connections, to see how people using the city's waterways made New York, and to see the parallels in their own lives and decisions, and the lives and decisions of other New Yorkers in other times, past and future. Pedestrian experience and neighborhood character are components of environmental scope. In this case, a pair of towers on the edge of the district and across the street from other tall buildings is unlikely to change the neighborhood character much. What will be the experience from the street? When I lived in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, we were furious about a structure being built on top of an existing building on Court Street. Once it was built, you didn't even know it was there. In Harlem, I live a couple of blocks from a new building that is too tall and really ugly and totally mismatched for the neighborhood. But I have to say, even though it is the ugliest building in creation, on ground level, it's set back. It doesn't make me miserable whenever I walk past it. And the proposed construction for 250 Water Street isn't even ugly and mismatched. The proposed project would not significantly affect visual resources in the neighborhood. It would, however, be a step forward environmentally. As the South Street Seaport Museum knows firsthand, the district's location on the waterfront is prone to climate change effects. Our work connecting people to the waterfront, past, present, and future, helps in achieving awareness and action regarding the climate crisis. So a project that will allow South Street Seaport Museum to stay alive is environmentally preferable to one that may leave it to its demise. I hope you will support this project. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speakers, I will now call on, I will now call on speakers number 5 through 10, just so that you're aware that you are coming up very soon. Number 5 is Maggie Flanagan. Number 6, Jonathan Kabak. Number 7, Stephen Edict. Number 8, Joanne Gorman. Number 9, Michael Kramer. And number 10, Stacy Shep. Maggie Flanagan, please unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Maggie Flanagan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm Maggie Flanagan. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I work as relief crew at South Street Seaport Museum after being a member of the volunteer crew, the staff, and an employee in the historic district for a very long time. Through all this experience, I'd like to share that I believe that the 250 Water Street is a necessary project and that any concerns about it can be addressed, and the project could even potentially be made better through this public review process where we all get to discuss it. As you know, the historic and cultural resources are an important part of the scoping for environmental review. And an important component of this project is its significant benefits to South Street Seaport Museum, the cultural leader in the district. The museum is truly the soul of the South Street Seaport Historic District. It was its first champion and its most authentic champion as well. The museum reveals and interprets how the past of the city and the port are entwined, how they're part of our DNA of who we are now. And the museum also teaches us about a sustainable and vibrant future, which must also include our waterways. Luckily, the museum has persisted as the cultural anchor of the district, even thriving through a half century, I think it is, of highs and lows in our region. I commend the dedication of the museum staff and volunteers, but massive capital and economic needs that are presented now are just too much to overcome to guarantee the museum's future. So it's welcome to see a project like 250 Water Street to begin to undergo environmental review in order to support the sustainability of the museum and its cultural leadership into the future. In addition to the cultural category of environmental review, which should receive heavy consideration, it will be good through the public review process to look at other categories of environmental review and where community concerns can be addressed, particularly through any cumulative effects. For example, the sanitation and community facilities categories are below threshold level in this study, yet there may indeed be a cumulative effect. For example, the parking lot that exists now is actually the home for many small businesses who have necessary vehicles, such as a florist delivery and things like that. So in those details, as we work it out, how can we continue to have the necessary vehicular access that this parking lot has provided over the years, while still taking advantage of improving the site and supporting the museum?
Thank you for your comments. We're at time now, so we'll move on to our next speaker. And I do remind everyone that we are accepting comments in writing, excuse me. Our next speaker, speaker number 6, Jonathan Quebec. And my apologies if I mispronounce your name. Jonathan Quebec, please unmute yourself.
You got it right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Captain Jonathan Quebec, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Oliver Hazard Perry, Rhode Island, operator of the flagship of the Ocean State. I grew up on a small island on the mid-Atlantic coast, just over 13 miles long and 2 miles wide. And no, it's not Martha's Vineyard or Long Beach Island, but rather Manhattan, the island at the center of the world, to borrow a popular book title. I often start out public speaking engagements with this fact about myself to contextualize my career as a mariner, marine educator, and to highlight how important it is to understand our relationship with the maritime ecosystem, to fully embrace the concepts of ocean literacy as defined by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and most importantly today, to share with you how important the South Street Seaport Museum was in my own understanding of what it means to live in a coastal community, and how the experiences that I had have had their influence and impact over some 3 decades of program development and delivery that I've been a part of across the country. I am a proud product of the South Street Seaport Museum, having visited often as a young child and beginning my connection to the institution as a volunteer at the age of 12. For me and so many others, it provided a gateway to experiences that were otherwise unimaginable to a person growing up in a metropolis such as New York. I built boats, fished the waters of New York Harbor, was introduced to an industry that to this day is responsible for 90% of the world's transport of the world's goods, and most importantly, gave me the opportunity to work shoulder to shoulder with people of all genders, races, and backgrounds, a true microcosm of Gotham. I'm one of hundreds of people I know for whom the intrinsic link between the prosperity of New York City and the sea was forged by the South Street Seaport Museum. And I know that we in turn are just a small number who share the same experience. It should not take a superstorm to showcase the both tremendous relevance of an institution like the South Street Seaport Museum or its vulnerability, whether environmental or economic. 50 years ago, Peter Stanford and others fought to preserve this neighborhood as a testament to what made New York City great. Today, I implore you to keep that beacon lit. As I have often shared over the course of this last year, the only way to ensure defeat is to stop fighting, to acquiesce. Instead, now is the time to muster our forces, to answer the rallying cry and defend what is most dear to us. New York would not be the city without its maritime heritage and history, and New York City must not be without its South Street Seaport Museum. The Seaport District must not go the way of Radio Row, Vinegar Hill, Kips Bay, and others. A meaningless name. The time to act is now and the pathway is clear. New York City has always had a tenuous relationship with the relics of its past, and much has been lost because of this attitude. Today, we can embark on a different course, investing in an institution that not only shares the valuable lessons of our history, but equally educates about the future. I urge the Department of City Planning to give this project their full attention, as its progress will have a deeply positive impact on both the city, district, and its anchor, the museum. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Stephen Edick. Once again, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Please unmute yourself.
That's quite all right. Thank you. It's Stefan Edick, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I am a captain and the executive director of the National Historic Landmark Schooner Adventure in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And I spent the formative part of my career at the South Street Seaport Museum in command of one of their ships, taking students of all ages to sea and serving as a platform for an unparalleled program in maritime education. I like to think of the South Street Seaport Museum as occupying a unique space at the intersection between history, culture, and commerce. And it serves as a portal for understanding for so many people and at so many different levels. It, in an era when America's connection to the working waterfront and the history of maritime commerce in particular, and as a result, their distance from the importance of maritime commerce to our current economic structure, the South Street Seaport maintains its position as a beacon, not just for New York and New Yorkers, but a beacon for all of the residents of cities whose working waterfronts and museums have disappeared completely. It is impossible to understate the importance of this project to the history, the future, both to the history and the future of the museum. And I can tell you that when I lived and worked in this remarkable historic district, I found the parking lot a curiosity and an eyesore in what otherwise is a remarkable space. I think the project as positive represents a great development both to the street level culture and to the capacity for the museum to fulfill its mission to introduce people to the working waterfront and everything it represents. The South Street Seaport Museum also stands as an avatar for the impact of climate change. We've seen that most recently with the impact of Hurricane Sandy and all of the damage to the museum and the remarkable district. It is also positioned uniquely to serve not just as an avatar of impact, but as a force to interpret that climate change so that it's more widely understood and appreciated, and folks are better positioned to make decisions and support the positive change that's going to be required. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Joanne Gorman. Joanne Gorman, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Joanne Gorman, and I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of South Street Seaport. Attempting to reap a profit off an investment gamble, the Howard Hughes Corp claims it wants to save the seaport, all the while treating with utter contempt the existing contextual zoning designed to protect this historic area. The height and mass of the structure proposed would have significant negative impacts within and outside its protected landmark borders. There is no way to mitigate the visual damage that this project would impose on the seaport and on the Brooklyn Bridge. A tower would become an inappropriate de facto location marker, usurping the iconic Brooklyn Bridge's long-standing and historically appropriate reference for the seaport. In the scoping notice of November 16, the bullet item regarding the proposed action selectively applies low scale as if it only applies to the immediate waterfront. And I quote, "Preserve and maintain the low scale character of the waterfront by distributing unused floor area to the currently unutilized development site," end quote. But the seaport's low scale is not just linked to the water's edge. It's a defining aspect of the entire district. A few comments on affordable housing. Affordable housing has been incorporated into developments in Lower Manhattan well before being made a requirement under mandatory inclusionary housing. It continues to be included in Lower Manhattan developments outside of MIH. There are at least 2 recent examples in Lower Manhattan, new as of right developments along Fulton Street, just outside the seaport, where 127 new units were included in 2018. Howard Hughes continually states that its proposal would be the first to incorporate affordable housing in Lower Manhattan under MIH. And while that's true, it's certainly misleading to the general public. Howard Hughes needs a zoning change for its project. That zoning change would require MIH. Howard Hughes is not offering affordable housing gratis. It has to include it. A new building within the existing zoning code at 250 Water in no way precludes the developer from adding affordable housing to the site. And some tax credits may also be available under this scenario. An affordable housing component can also be a part of any public air rights transfer for use outside the historic district. Nothing within the geographic scope of the development site has changed in the years since the 1977 designation of the district and the 2000 zoning amendment, which reinforced the landmarks designation. To justify a change that so blatantly dismisses the district's guidelines in favor of a developer's private profit intent. In fact, the Seaport, as well as other historic areas, have only reinforced the importance of our historic setting to the vitality, health, and economic value they bring to the city. When considering unavoidable adverse impacts, you might just consider this: the damage is avoidable by simply not allowing projects like this. One final word from the Board of Standards and Appeals. The taxpayers are not here to bail out poor private choices. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll move on to our next speaker, and I'll actually call on numbers 9 through 13. Michael Kramer, number 9, Stacy Shub, number 10, Paul Goldstein, number 11, Emily Hellstrom, number 12, Carolyn Miller, number 13. Michael Kramer, please
Hi,
unmute.
Olga. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Our Seaport Coalition considers this draft scope of work to be deficient in many key areas. We will provide our comments in writing indicating all of the changes needed to conduct a fully compliant environmental impact statement. Prior to the issuance of any 250 Water Street permits and/or authorizations under the zoning resolution, these mega towers must be lawfully permitted and undertaken. The lack of in-person meetings has limited our opportunity to give testimony and for face-to-face discussions, and made attendance impossible for those who are technology challenged. We would like to go on record asking City Planning to postpone further action until the Executive Order 202 has been lifted by Governor Cuomo. The inclusion of the South Street Seaport Museum in this application mixes apples with oranges. It is conservatively assumed that the South Street Seaport Museum would not remain open in the future without this action. This statement is demonstrably false. Any linkage of the museum's future to this application as being the price to pay to provide political cover for elected officials to approve this development is both cynical and fantastical. The Seaport Coalition asks that the scoping document remove all references to the South Street Seaport Museum. The Seaport Coalition encourages the applicant to build up to 100% affordable housing units at 250 Water Street without exceeding zoning regulations on this site. This option should also be studied. Losing the 400-car parking lot may result in the direct displacement of residents or businesses and is a potential outcome that must be studied rather than ignored. The applicant claims there are no students, visitors, concert goers, etc. to be impacted by this proposal. We estimate crowds of up to 3,400 concert goers for each summer concert and other events on the Pier 17 rooftop. There are more than 1,000 students and faculty attending the immediately adjacent Peck Slip and Blue schools who would be forced to endure 60 months of remediation and construction. This was never contemplated when the Department of Education acquired the adjacent post office site for a public school, nor when parents signed up their students to be enrolled. This draft scope of work should only reference development options that are consistent with the zoning, density, and neighborhood recognition provisions as defined by the 2014 Seaport Working Group, whose final summary, as approved by a consensus that included the applicant, contained principles and guidelines. These findings were site-specific for 250 Water Street. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll now call on Stacy Shub. Please unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. My name is Stacy Shub, a resident of the South Street Historic District for over 20 years. I've thrown out my written testimony to address some misleading statements or untruths that have been stated so far today. The infamous parking lot to refer to the present use of the lot as a surface parking lot that has been there for 50 years, a blight on the community and eyesore. Sure, we don't like it either, but keep in mind it's only a parking lot because the previous owners have refused to build as of right, waiting for an opportunity like this to pierce the zoning envelope of 120 feet to serve their own bottom line. 8 previous options were rejected by landmarks, and when the community finally compromised and a ninth rendition was approved, the owners refused to build on it. The environmental impact. To hear Mr. Bulworth refer to the surface parking lot as supporting an outmoded method of transportation today would be laudable if it were not for the fact that the 470-foot twin towers that will replace it will have even more parking spaces. It'll be more impactful on the environment through its carbon output to operate it, and supporting building on that lot that was completely submerged by Sandy is laughable at best. Mr. Bulworth himself said that great flooding event closed since Sandy knocked out the museum, yet somehow it's safe to build 470 feet. Look no more than 2 blocks over and see a tall building that construction has ceased on because it's leaning 3 inches over. The contextual towers, as everyone keeps referring to them along the ground that you show in the background, are just that. Towers of Lower Manhattan and not the historic district itself. They're outside the district. It's ridiculous to suggest that this building is in any way contextual when you compare it to the World Trade Center or the skyline of the city at large. Water versus uplands. To say that somehow by building 470-foot twin towers saves the low-scale nature of the waterfront is preposterous. What preserves the low-scale nature of the waterfront is not moving the towers to the other side of the district. What saves it is that you tried to build and you were denied the ability to build on the waterfront. So it's a perpetuation of the same false option you present at the community meetings. Do you want towers on the water or do you want towers at 250 Water Street? The community rejects both. Apologies to the speaker who said this, but you won't even know it's there. Tell that to the children who go to school next door, the people who live in shadows, the people who from the street will no longer be able to see the bridge. I'm sorry, but that feels like one of the most preposterous things I've ever heard. And finally, here's what my mother always said. When someone says they have money problems, money usually isn't the problem. Why is the museum, as the CEO said himself, not operating? Where is the dehumidification to protect the artifacts in your care? 8 years since the disaster, 5 years since the grant, cries for money to reopen, when there's $15 million of untouched money, $10 million from FEMA that may disappear if unused. Why should I or anyone else believe that even $50 million will somehow save the museum? There are options to save the museum and options to save the seaport. Please seriously consider them. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll now move on to speaker number 11, Paul Goldstein. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's hard to imagine that less than 20 years after the community came together to put into place new zoning for the Seaport Historic District intended to guide future development that would respect and maintain the special low-scale character of this historic district, we have a developer looking to gain city approval to completely violate that zoning. They are proposing 2 470-foot towers that would totally dwarf buildings that predominate in this district, characterized by structures that average 4 to 5 stories in height. In 2003, City Planning joined with Community Board 1 in sponsoring and supporting this new zoning that reflected a broad consensus on how to properly build new structures in this 11-block historic district. In fact, that zoning, as was mentioned, came about after the Landmarks Commission denied 9 buildings in the district, calling them inappropriately tall and not fitting in with the district. It should be noting that the zoning approved by City Planning and the City Council had the support of Community Board 1, every local elected official, the Downtown Alliance, the Seaport Museum, the Economic Development Corporation, and all the other property owners in the Seaport. Now, the proposal to transfer air rights is also something that was never envisioned. There is a system, Seaport Development Rights Program, where there are certain receiving sites, and they're almost all located outside the district. 250 Water Street is not a receiving site. And this would be an abomination to move air rights into a site within the district. That was never the purpose. The purpose was to move those development rights outside the district where they belong and keep the character, the low scale character of the district intact. I will move on. The chair of the community board, which I serve on, already talked about the brownfield, and we don't have the data yet. So we should probably wait for that. And we also don't yet have a plan that the city is putting together for making resiliency measures for the seaport. City planning proceeding with this project at this time seems totally geared towards satisfying a single private developer and helping them make good on a very questionable purchase of this property for a price that could only make sense if they win the zoning approvals they seek. The city should not be partnered to this. The zoning put in place in 2003 should be preserved so that the Seaport District remains the very special part of Lower Manhattan that it is today. And we need not ruin the historic district to save the museum.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is speaker number 12, Emily Hellstrom. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Emily Hellstrom, and I'm a former PTA president of the Peck Slip School and a founding member of Children First, representing over 800 parents and families whose children go to school directly adjacent to 250 Water Street, as well as other area schools. It is difficult to overstate the devastating impacts this set of monster towers would have on the surrounding area. Of course, it feels like a fool's errand to spend time today to testify when we've been told by many folks in favor of this project that it's in the bag and that it's a done deal. And with all the fancy lobbyists, lawyers, PR people, and money that have been thrown at this application. In fact, on Monday, September 17th, 2018, I was invited to a meeting with Saul Scherl at the Peck Slip School, along with Principal Maggie Sienna, Megan Malvern, and Louis Sanchez, the head of school operations, where Mr. Scherl asked us quite directly what we wanted in the way of a community benefit for the school in exchange for our complicit acceptance of these behemoth towers, a sort of carve the dead horse up before it's dead style of gathering. Wisely, our principal said, "We are quite fortunate to have a beautiful new building and do not need to be bribed. What I want is for our children to be able to learn in an environment free of dust and noise, and the play street outside our building to remain in full use to enable our children to have recess outside." And this really cuts to the heart of it. The environmental impact on these children for a years-long build is untenable. Building a 12-story structure versus 2 out-of-scale 470-foot towers is incomparable. Years more construction, pile driving, dust, debris, closed streets, dangerous cranes, heavy trucks and machinery, and in the end, a monster development which would loom menacingly over the school, wrecking forever this historic district, the first of its kind and the birthplace of our city. But one cannot speak of environmental impact without getting at the heart of the dangers that are just below the blacktop cap at the 250 Water Street site. I would love to be able to comment on the soil sample borings that were taken there and see what the scientists have tested for and the warnings they have for our children. But somehow the remedial investigative report was not available to us to review before this meeting. No fewer than 2 community board meetings have passed where we were supposed to hear exactly what was in that report. We'll get it to you, we heard at both the environmental committee and the full board meeting. Convenient that we will get it after this environmental impact statement meeting. Trust the process, many say. Trust the process? How can we trust when at the start of this process, Howard Hughes, Saul Scherl, and Langdon Engineering Company came into our school building, spoke at a public PTA meeting, and told us to our face that the mercury that was under the ground was just organic mercury found in landfill all over the city? Well, when Children First looked into us, it was not organic mercury, but instead elemental mercury, left over from multiple thermometer factories located at the lot at a time when disposal of these chemicals was not under the stringent restrictions we have today. Elemental mercury is highly dangerous toxin, unprecedented and devastatingly dangerous to small children and pregnant mothers, people we have in abundance at both Peck Slip and Blue School. I call on you to stop this process until Children First and the greater community has a chance to see what is in those reports. And after
Thank
that,
you for your comments. We will now move on to the next speaker in the interest of time, but we will accept all comments in writing as I will present throughout this scoping meeting. Our next speaker is number 13, Caroline Miller.
Hello, I am a resident of the Seaport area, and I want to speak today to several impacts that I think this project would have, including land use and zoning, neighborhood character, historic and cultural resources, and the pedestrian experience. I think all of these things are impacted by the fact that this project is egregiously out of context for the Seaport Historic District. It's 4 times the 120-foot allowable under current zoning, and it's 5 times as higher than the current existing building, any current existing building in the district. The argument that it's okay to transfer development rights, which were meant to be taken out of the district, within the district, based on the notion that 250 Water Street is located on the upland side of the district, is just a bald invention. The zoning applies to the whole district, and it was passed in 2003 with an eye specifically to this site. 8 earlier projects for this site were rejected by the LPC as out of context for the district because they would overwhelm the small collection of low-rise historic buildings. And none of them was anywhere near as tall as this building. To put this project in a broader perspective, an examination of the records of all 114 buildings approved or in the approval process for historic districts around the city over the last 16 years shows not one building anywhere near this height or this far out of scale with the neighboring buildings. Each approved building in a historic district is carefully scaled to the districts that they're in. Breaking that record would have a huge impact on city policy and the fate of historic districts. This project would make not only this district, but all historic districts in the city targets for high-rise development by commercial interests. It would send a message to developers that all they have to do to get a project approved is to throw in the minimum number of affordable housing units and support a worthy cause in exchange. I urge the committee in this process to consider the effects on all historic districts and not just this one, and to keep in mind that everyone in the community is up for building something on this site within the allowable height limit that could include affordable housing, and there's no rule that says that this has to be either a parking lot or this monster.
Thank you for your testimony. At this time, I'd like to take a brief pause to address any members of the public who have joined our meeting via telephone. I will now note that if those members of the public who have dialed in would like to provide verbal testimony, please indicate that you would like to speak by dialing *9 on your telephone. That will help our team identify that you would like to provide verbal testimony. Dial *9. Once again, dial *9 if you would like to speak. As a reminder, we do encourage any telephone dial-in participants who wish to provide testimony to please register via telephone using the dial-in participant hotline if they are able to. The phone number to the dial-in participant hotline, is one of our toll-free numbers, and I'll note a few of them here. 877-853-5247, 877-853-5247. And if you are prompted, and you will be prompted for a meeting ID, your meeting ID is 933-4242-6465. Then the password is the number 1. All right, it does look like we do have one speaker who has dialed in who would like to provide testimony. The phone number ends in 428, last 3 digits 428. Please unmute yourself by dialing *6 and state your name for the record.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
We can.
Great. Good afternoon. This is Tiffany Windler. I am a resident of the community. I've lived in the area for the past 15 years and most recently for the past several years. I'm not too far from the proposed site at 250 Water Street. I'm a public school parent, and my daughter attends Peck Slip School directly by the proposed site. And as well, I'll have a son who'll be starting there on next year. I first want to thank everyone within the Peck Slip community for keeping us fully informed of this process, as well as our local community board. I would like to add my thoughts on number one, as you've heard throughout the time here, about keeping our children first. I think most parents are well aware that there is an opportunity to build on this site, which we understand that there's a right to. One of the things that we are most concerned about, especially as it relates to our children and their learning experience and their learning environment, it would be the long-term building that would take place should mega towers be on the table. I know that so many of us, parents, school administrators, teachers alike, have really dealt with a lot this year as it pertains to education and school. Many students are doing hybrid, many more students are doing remote, and we are all hopeful that by next September, we will be able to get back into our school buildings full time. Once that occurs, teachers, administrators will have to work overtime to ensure that students who have lost all of those skills for not being within the physical school building within the last year will simply have to play catch up and be prepared for the new grade that they are in. We want to ensure that our students are playing catch up with their education as their social and emotional learning is being focused on, but they also do not have to deal just with an extended period of construction that is so close to a building where they'll be learning in a place which is essentially their second home. So I'm sharing these thoughts as a resident of the community, as well as a parent of the nearby school there, that ultimately whatever final decision that is made has to really put the children first, because they are the ones which will be most impacted. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. If you can kindly state your name for the record once more, that would be helpful.
Yes. Tiffany Winbush, Tiffany Winbush, as in boy, U-S-H.
Thank you very much.
Thank
We will
you.
now move on to participants who would like to provide testimony who have registered online. I will call speakers number 14 through 20. Please wait for your name to be spoken before you unmute yourself. Number 14, Megan Malvern. Number 15, Linda Hellstrom. Number 16, Linda Roche. Number 17, Adrian Sosen. Number 18, Grace Lee. Number 19, David Sheldon. Number 20, Julie Fitch. Megan Malvern, please unmute yourself. Megan Malvern, please unmute yourself if you're able to.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Sorry, there's so many unmute and mute buttons. Thanks. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Megan Malvern. I am a parent of a third grade student at Peck Slip Elementary, small business owner, and Seaport area resident for nearly 15 years. This draft scoping document fails to thoroughly consider new citywide text amendments to code being tailored for coastal flood resilience, as they still are in development and will not be set into law for many months. It would be a dereliction of duty by this commission to consider this EIS until the laws governing the changing code are adopted. Knowing the specifics and the pervasive incentives being offered, the FAR giveaways and additional height bonuses to build more flood resilient structures are supremely applicable and impactful in this acre-wide enormous development, and it is critical to ensure a true assessment. The new mandated flood-proof, watertight code in the high-risk flood zones being encouraged where 250 Water Street is located will cause massive floodwater deflection, displacement, and high pressure from storm surge into the adjacent Front Street historic homes built there in the late 1700s and the rest of the fragile neighborhood. Furthermore, the historic scale and style enshrined in the 2003 CPC downzoning was not codified therein just to uphold character. It's also there to physically protect the structures and integrity of irreplaceable landmarks nearby. What isn't represented in this draft scope document and should be considered is how the current acre-wide open parcel at 250 Water Street during Sandy's devastating landfall allowed water to naturally diverge and dissipate, saving millions of dollars in damage and possibly lives. As the code has so dramatically changed to reinforce and fortify and make resilient new buildings, the impact of those changes on the area and buildings around them must be fully understood and studied. Likely it'll be found that without any flood mitigation measures built into the neighborhood, which the city has failed to do in 8 years since Sandy, the only type of development that can possibly and responsibly be safely built at 250 Water must incorporate underground site-wide storm surge containment tanks and flow-through ground floor. Currently, both proposed action and no action builds in this anemic environmental impact statement scope of work for this highly prone flood zone and supremely cherished and valuable district is woefully incomplete and clearly being rushed through this review. Placing this watertight megastructure inside the historic district will create an environmental situation that has never been experienced before in the city history. Damn the city and Rebney compromise politicians who are turning a blind eye on the absurdity of shoehorning in twin 470-foot tall mega towers into a high-risk floodplain and an already oversaturated luxury market by overturning 50 years of previous city planning and preservation to do so. The process governing this development needs to be thorough and thoughtful, none of which is represented herein. I therefore insist that this draft scoping document be sent back to the drawing board until the aforementioned data is included. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is Linda Hellstrom.
Can you hear?
We can hear it. We can also hear a bit of background noise.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm Linda Hellstrom, and with my husband, Jay Hellstrom, we live at 273 Water Street in the Captain Rose House, the third oldest surviving building in Manhattan, built in 1773. Our centuries-old building is an integral part of the fabric of the entire historic district. We are within the district, not on the edge, and certainly not in some transitional area, a label Howard Hughes is trying to put on Water Street. The South Street Seaport Historic District is more than merely a neighborhood. It is a designated historic district, and its zoning mandates a height limit of 120 feet. This is not a random zoning, but purposeful and negotiated years ago to protect the historic authenticity of the entire 11-block neighborhood of mostly 6-story buildings. And this zoning is maintained by using the mechanism of transferring air rights out, not in. The reason this area looks historic with its cobblestone streets and century-old buildings is because these buildings are not squashed intermittently among high-rise towers, but instead exist as an integral part of an entire low-rise area, and the whole is equal to more than the sum of its parts. Once one developer is allowed to transfer in air rights, the precedent is set. Nothing stands in the way of other developers transferring their unused air rights into the district and building their own housing towers. Just picture buildings cantilevered over Mr. C's Seaport or the historic Paris Cafe. There would be no going back. The entire historic district is in jeopardy, make no mistake. Before buying in the area, we did much historical research on the district and on our own building and made a decision to buy, knowing it was in a protected, historic, low-rise district. Howard Hughes bought and overpaid for his parcel of land, knowing full well that only 120-foot zoning is allowed. Howard Hughes now asks to be bailed out by smashing that zoning and ruining an historic district enjoyed by all the citizens of New York and hundreds of tourists on their tour buses every summer day. Howard Hughes will leave and go to Texas and leave behind a destroyed gem of history of the founding of New York City that can never be recaptured. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker is number 16, Linda Roche. Please unmute yourself. Linda Roche, if you're able to hear me, please unmute yourself. We are ready for your testimony.
I believe she may have an older version of Zoom. We'll try reaching it. Oh,
Linda Roche, one more time, if you're able to unmute yourself.
I've got it now. Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. Okay.
Thank you. Linda, please hold on one moment. It appears that we're experiencing technical difficulties at the moment. Just going to ask our back of house team to please prepare the video. We are not allowed to project video on the scoping meeting. Please. There we go. All right, you may begin.
As you said, my name is Linda Roche, a longtime resident of the Seaport area for 48 years. Please accept this oral testimony as regards the application proposal by the Howard Hughes Corporation to build a new mixed-use development, including mandatory inclusionary housing at the 250 Water Street site, currently a parking lot. Howard Hughes proposes to build twin 470-foot towers on this lot within the boundary of the South Street Seaport Historic District. The current approved 2003 zoning height limit for this site is 120 feet. Approving a building at the height proposed 470 feet by Howard Hughes would dramatically change the context and scale of the historic district and set a dangerous precedent for all current historic and landmarked areas throughout New York City to be eroded. A structure at the bulk and height would create extreme shadows throughout the area, including that of the iconic Brooklyn Bridge, residences, as well as the two public schools, the two schools adjacent to this lot. Flood resiliency is a major concern due to the site being included in the FEMA 100-year flood plan and in the New York City coastal zone. And this also includes concerns for the impact of the already overloaded water and sewer infrastructure. As an active member of this community, I can fairly state that our community is in full support of affordable housing, and we would be happy to support 100% MIH building at the 120 zoning height limit. Our objection to this proposal has nothing to do with affordable housing, as some would suggest. The objection is to the outlandish and disrespectful construction proposed for this historic district. Any approved construction should be within the zoning, density, and contextual architecture of the South Street Seaport Historic District. The approval of this proposal should be based on the current zoning limits and should not destroy the historic atmosphere of the area. In conclusion, I would also like to add my objection to Zoom methods for these proceedings, which are extremely exclusionary and open to only those who have the technology. These meetings were meant to be public. This is not a public meeting. Further, I would also go on record as requesting that any further action on this application be postponed at least until Governor Cuomo rescinds the current executive order. I will also be sending my complete testimony to CPC. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll now move on to speaker number 17, Adrienne Sosin. Adrienne Sosin, please unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good, thank you. The fate of 250 Water Street is existential to me as a resident of Southbridge Towers and to the entire South Street Seaport community, the city, and the nation. The Seaport area is a living example of 18th and 19th century buildings nestled under the engineering achievement of the Brooklyn Bridge that brings worldwide attention and visitors to New York City. I call on the City Planning Commission to consider the long-term interests of the city's residents and save the historic Seaport. Considering the lack of community participation that COVID has imposed on the city, it is unfair to me and to the public that any changes in zoning or sales of air rights be ruled upon until restrictions are lifted on in-person meetings. Even though I am participating here, many of my neighbors and family are not able to do so, even if they so desire, which makes this meeting demonstrative of unequal access to city government. The Howard Hughes Corporation's plans for 250 Water are totally inappropriate and offensive to me. They propose a behemoth taking up a full block with high apartment towers rising above it. The building plan is an offense to the Seaport Historic District because towers themselves are unhistoric. Literal towers looming over the low-rise blocks will ruin the seaport's historic ambiance by being viewable from anywhere in and around the district. As it continues to engage in multiple deceptions of the public and officials, HHC, the Howard Hughes Corporation's renderings, hide their tower designs, showing them as invisible or street level, and implying that these towers will be part of the background skyline as compared to the Freedom Tower, not to the low-rise seaport. Deviously, HHC has also dangled an incentive, an endowment and building plan for the South Street Seaport Museum. While the museum is important to me and I was an early member, I now ask you to reject the premise that HHC can link approval of 250 Water Street's towers, including the purchase and inappropriate transfer of city-owned air rights, to the immediate survival of the museum. Even dedicated elected officials who have the city's best interests in mind seem to be swayed by support of the Seaport Museum, but Howard Hughes is duplicitously presenting only its side of the issues without telling the full story of the museum situation. I personally would be pleased to welcome new neighbors in affordable housing if those homes were contextual in the historic area, not in inappropriate towers. These problems and the existential problem of flood mitigation in this area are primary and should be considered before anything else. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll now move on to speaker number 18, Grace Lee.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Grace Lee. I'm a mother of 3 children, ages 3, 5, and 8, and a Lower Manhattan resident for over a decade. I am also the co-founder of a parent-led coalition called Children First. We are today talking about the environmental impact this project will have on this community, yet people with commercial interests in the Seaport Museum have completely ignored how this will affect the many vulnerable, sensitive receptors in this community. Let me start by giving a little background on this site. Last year, my mom friends called me to tell me that this site was submitted to the brownfield cleanup program just across the street from our children's schools. The developer tried to tell the community that there was nothing to be concerned about. There was just a little mercury and not to worry. The mothers in this community went down to the city archives and discovered that this site used to be the former site of the largest thermometer factory in the country in the late 1800s, producing over 600,000 thermometers a year. We looked at the soil testing records and found that the mercury levels were at 120 parts per million, multiples above safe levels. Minuscule amounts of mercury can cause permanent brain damage in children. There are over 400 students who attend the schools less than 20 feet from the site, as young as 2 years old, just like my preschool daughter. We will not be receiving any data from the remedial investigation for the brownfield cleanup that was performed over the last several months until far after the deadline for the public comment period for this EIS draft scope process closes. We are living in unprecedented times. There are hundreds of families sending their children to school across the street from this site. We are working families trying to balance work with taking care of children, doing a mix of remote and in-person learning at these schools, dealing with health and employment concerns during this pandemic. Our children depend on the open air rooftop spaces at our schools to get badly needed physical activity during their school days and out on the street. They depend on open windows for fresh air circulation during this pandemic for safe places to learn. It is unacceptable for this process to move forward without allowing our families to convene in person to have discussions about this issue and without being provided with adequate time to review the brownfield cleanup program remedial investigation data. Mercury is not the only concern for our families. The scope of the EIS needs to include a comprehensive review of how construction at this site will affect our children. Research has shown that noise has detrimental effects upon children's performance at school. 5 years of construction is nearly a child's entire elementary school career. Our children are more valuable than a museum, a high rise, and the private interests of the mayor. That is unequivocal. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll now move on to speaker number 19, David Sheldon. Please unmute yourself.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I have been an activist in the Seaport community now for 10 years. For 20 years, I have been a volunteer, a sailor, a member, and a contributor to the South Street Seaport Museum. It has been my privilege to sail with 4 of the museum's speakers this afternoon. I certainly look forward to doing so again in the coming year. I ask that the commission consider what New York values in the South Street Seaport Historic District, why it was created, and why we continue to maintain historic districts, and this district in particular. Here are the buildings, artifacts, ships, waterfront, and the living practices of our city's maritime roots. Another time and another world are brought into the present with a step into an otherwise contemporary New York neighborhood. The neighborhood is characterized by low-rise buildings, many of historic vintage, landmarked, and registered in their own right. As a waterfront district, it still comprises a bridge between maritime practice and work ashore, a connection missing from too much of the city. Consider then the effect of the proposed building for 250 Water Street. Start with a wall 7 stories high, 100 feet around the entire lot. This is the facade of the lower portion of the building. It will overshadow and dominate the venerable architecture around it. Over this parapet are to loom 2 buildings 470 feet tall. The masts of tall ships and the towers of the Brooklyn Bridge, once the visual keynotes of the district, will be dwarfed. But to truly grasp the impact of this building, consider it in the context of the developer's work here to date. The visual connection to the horizontal monolith of Pier 17 is evident in the presentation of the project in overview. The new Pier 17, unable to accommodate the visiting tall ships that thrill the neighborhood with their arrival. Follow the outlines in the project area mapped in Figure 1, past the failed high-end retail that is the product of the developer's reimagined and renamed Seaport District, once a popular destination for the city and for the world. Walk up to 250 Water Street, where the developer proposes to complete the streets of the Seaport. Perhaps finish would be the better word. The outlines of the project area leave little doubt of the place of 250 Water Street as the district's headstone. Howard Hughes Corporation touts to its stockholders the synergy of the commercial retail and residential aspects of its developments. The impact of the proposal for 250 Water Street must therefore be understood in terms of the developer's planning for the district as a whole. To quote CEO David O'Reilly of HHC, fully connected amenity rich environments featuring outstanding dining, shopping, and entertainment options in a walkable urban core are defining elements of the master plan communities and mixed-use small cities throughout our portfolio. No one has a problem with dining, shopping, or retail, but they are not the defining elements of the Seaport Historic District they were charged to protect.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank
We're
you.
at time, and we will now move on to our next speaker. Speaker number 20 is Julie Finch.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
So I am against this. The outrageously tall buildings that would be blocking the view of the Brooklyn Bridge. And I want to say that I volunteered at the museum for about 10 years. They are inappropriately tall, and 120 feet was agreed upon in the 2003 zoning. Do not move air rights to Water Street. They do not belong in the historic district. This is terrible. A Texas developer, Howard Hughes Corporation, is trying to pull a trick, holding the museum as a ransom. This is very unfair to the community. And there is poisonous mercury beneath the brown field at 250 Water Street, and it's endangering the children, as other speakers have mentioned. Howard Hughes's proposal to build in an historic district is a farce. This is a nightmare. And as Ada Louise Huxtable has mentioned, she was the architecture critic in the Times. In the 70s, she said, "I am so weary of those stupid alliances between developers and cultural institutions in which the cultural institution is given a block of space and the developers overbuild the rest and make an enormous profit." And on page 296 in the book, which you cannot see because I am hidden, it's Preserving South Street Seaport by James Lindgren. It says that the EDC refused to repair the air conditioning, and that the EDC was an intrigue and it was a conflict of interest. This is really outrageous, and I am very upset about this. I am also an historic preservationist working on another, I'm co-chair of the Friends of Hopper Gibbons Underground Railroad site. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. At this time, we do not have any other speakers or members of the public or otherwise who have registered and who have indicated to us that they wish to provide testimony. I'd now like to ask our production team to please display our instruction slide. And at this moment, it is approximately 3:42 p.m. We will now wait approximately 5 minutes for any members of the public to complete the online registration process before closing this meeting. In the event that there is someone who would like to provide testimony and has not yet had a chance to speak, we will take a brief pause and return to this meeting at 3:47 p.m. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome back, everyone. We are resuming the public scoping meeting for the 250 Water Street proposal. Once again, for the record, this proposal seeker number is 21 DCP 084M. My name is Olga Abinader. I'm the director of the New York City Department of City Planning, Environmental Assessment and Review Division. We are currently on part 3 of today's public scoping meeting, where members of the general public are providing testimony. Once again, a 3-minute time tracker will start when members of the public provide their testimony. Now, I will note that we haven't had anyone register to provide testimony over the break, but it does appear that we have had several dialers join us during the break. So at this point, I'd like to ask anyone who has dialed in to please indicate if they would like to provide testimony by pressing *9 on their telephone. *9 on their telephone, and that will indicate to the Department of City Planning that you wish to provide verbal testimony. Okay, it does appear that we have someone who would like to provide testimony. Their phone number ends in the last 3 digits, 638. 638. If your phone number ends in 638, please unmute yourself by dialing *6 and state your name for the record.
My name is Michael Yeaman, and I want to express my strong objection to the 250 Water Street development. This is a violation of the zoning of the historic district, and it is no reason for the developer to try to transfer air rights into the district. I have been a long-time volunteer for the museum sailing, going back to the days of Peter Stanford, and I am a bit too old now to be as active, but I am a member of the SOS organization. We are determined that the museum be preserved, but that the historic district height limitation not be broken. We urge the City Planning Commission to prevent that from happening. The environmental disaster which has been described to you is only a part of the tragedy of the development of 250 Water Street. We urge the City Planning Commission not to support the proposal of the Howard Hughes Corporation. Thank you very much for your time.
We thank you for your testimony. It looks like we have another dialer who would like to provide testimony. Phone number ending in 369. Once again, last 3 digits of the phone number, 369. Please unmute yourself by pressing *6 and state your name for the record. Once again, phone number ending with the last 3 digits, 369. Oh, looks like we have you on the call. We are able to hear you. Please state your name for the record.
Nara? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Samara Glazer, and I'm a resident of the historic South Street Seaport District. I am 17 years old, and I would just like to say that I'm in opposition of this building. I feel that it does not align with how this district should be, and I feel that I have to do my duty as a citizen of this district to protect it for my potential future children. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. At this time, is there anyone else who wishes to provide testimony today who has not done so? If we have anyone else who has dialed in, please dial *9, and that'll tell us if you would like to join us, or please otherwise alert our team via Zoom by raising your hand that you would like to provide testimony at this time. Please stand by as our team provides a list of anyone else who may wish to testify at the moment.
time, it doesn't look like we have any other speakers.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. All right, so if no one else wishes to speak at this time, we will move ahead to close today's public scoping meeting. Once again, for those of you who had difficulties providing testimony today, we would like to provide our instruction slide, our slide that provides our email address and our mailing address on the screen for anyone who has joined us online. So please give us a moment to project that information. I want to make sure that everyone recalls that you may provide written testimony by selecting this public scoping meeting on the upcoming meetings page of the NYC Engage portal. Please give us a moment as we project our PowerPoint presentation. I believe it's slide number 14, so that we can project that information on the screen. Here we go. Thank you. All right, so once again, recall that you may provide written comments until Monday, January 11th, 2021, unless otherwise notified, via mail at 120 Broadway, 31st floor, New York, New York, 10271, attention Olga Avenator, or via email at 21DCP084M_DL@planning.nyc.gov. Once again, the deadline is Monday, January 11th, 2021 for submitting your written comments unless otherwise notified on the DCP website. The time is approximately 3:54 p.m. and today's public scoping meeting is now closed. Thank you to everyone who made this public scoping meeting possible. Have a great afternoon.